There have now been over 100 animal studies which shows that fluoride damages the brain. There have also been 23 IQ studies, most of them from China, but one from India, one from Iran, and one from Mexico, which show an association between moderate exposure to fluoride and lowered IQ in children. And I actually visited the villages where one of these studies was done. It was a very good study. They controlled for lead, they controlled for iodine. Most of the villages were almost the two villages were almost identical, except for the fact that their well water was different. And the author of this study estimated that the IQ would be lowered at 1.9 parts per million. And that offers no adequate margin of safety for children drinking water at 1 parts per million when you consider the massive range of sensitivity to any toxic effect, and the fact that once you put fluoride in the water, you can't control the dose. Another concern, which many of us have had for many years, is fluoride's impact on the thyroid gland. For between the 30s and the 50s, doctors in Argentina, France, and Germany were giving patients with hyperthyroidism, overactive thyroid gland, sodium fluoride tablets to lower thyroid function. And the doses that they were using were between 2.5 and 4.5 milligrams per day, which is exceeded by many people drinking fluoridated water. For example, the Institute of Medicine actually advises people to drink 3 liters of water a day. So clearly then they would be in the range for lowered thyroid function. And once again, as in many of these other issues, the fluoridating countries, including the United States, are simply not doing the studies. They're not investigating to see if there's a relationship between fluoridation and lowered IQ, fluoridation and arthritis, fluoridation and hypothyroidism. Key health studies have not been done in fluoridated countries. If you don't look, you don't find. They would like to imply, because they don't see anything, there's nothing wrong. But if they're not looking, they won't find. You often hear the promoters say things like, oh, we've been doing this for 60 years. If there's any problem, we would know about it by now. Oh, no, you wouldn't, unless you were doing the studies. Another issue that came out in 1997 was a researcher in England found that fluoride accumulated in the human pineal gland. And the pineal gland is a little gland between the two parts of the brain, the two hemispheres of the brain. It's not protected by the blood-brain barrier. It has a high perfusion rate of blood, and it also is a calcifying tissue like the teeth and the bones. And so this researcher hypothesized that fluoride would be attracted to this tissue, this little gland, like a magnet. And sure enough, when she investigated, the average level of fluoride on these little calcium hydroxyapatite crystals was 9,000 parts per million, up to 21,000 parts per million, which means that this little gland has a higher concentration of fluoride than any other tissue in the body, including the bone. This researcher, Jennifer Luke, also did animal studies, and in the animal studies, she found that fluoride lowered the production of melatonin, the hormone that this little gland makes, and incidentally, it only makes it at night, the hormone of darkness. This pineal gland reacts to light. Descartes called it the seat of the soul. Not only did it lower melatonin levels in these animals, but also shorten the time to puberty, which is absolutely consistent. Melatonin is thought to act like a biological clock, involved with timing of puberty, timing of aging, timing of jet lag and sleeping patterns and so on. Controls all kinds of things. And what they think happens that with the child, at birth, the melatonin levels are high, and with childhood, they gradually lower, and at a certain point, the lowered melatonin levels trigger the production of the sex hormones, leading to puberty. Ironically, that first study that was published, which I already referred to in the bones, also recorded that the young girls in the fluoridated community, Newburgh, were menstruating on average 5 months earlier than the young girls in the non-fluoridated community. Now, they didn't think that was significant at the time. Now, with Jennifer Luke's work, it is clearly takes on a new perspective. Kids now are reaching puberty 7, 8, 9. It has people very, very worried. But once again, the fluoridating countries have made absolutely no effort to reproduce Luke's work. And it's not difficult. They could have done it easily. The Department of Health and Human Services has adopted to this, quote, sacred policy of fluoridation is to deny, critique the methodologies, but don't attempt to reproduce the studies. If you don't look, you don't find. And they're using the absence of study as if it was the same as the absence of harm, which is absolutely ridiculous, utterly irresponsible. So now they're giving every indication, particularly the Center of Disease Control that avidly promotes fluoridation around the United States, and around the world for that matter. The impression that they give is that it's more important now to protect this practice than to protect the health of the American people and our babies and our children. It's almost as if the teeth have become the most important tissue, the most important organ in the body, instead of our brains, instead of our thyroid glands, instead of our pineal glands, instead of our kidneys.